Welcome back to a special edition of Mr. E History. All right, we're going to review chapter 14. So some of this stuff should be familiar, but we're going over it again. Let's get into it. All right, so we had an event called the Mexican-American War. If you remember, it was a border dispute. We sent some troops into a gray area, then it got attacked. Let's not worry about those details too much. Let's focus on what was the treaty coming out of the Mexican-American War. Do you remember this? This was a former test question. Did you say Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? You would be correct. Now, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo says that we get some land. What's that land called? Did you say Mexican secession? Okay. That's what. So we get this treaty, we get this Mexican secession. This here is the Mexican secession, that pink or salmon colored land. Let's look at a bigger map. Here we go. So from the Mexican-American War, we get this land. Okay? Now I hope you remember details like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. I hope you remember that this is called the Mexican secession. But let's pretend you don't remember those details. That's okay. We get some land. You're probably standing on it if you're here in Utah. Does that make sense? We get this western land. Okay, we get this land. I get it. We got land. What does that have to do with the Civil War? That's what we're going to talk about next. What's the debate? Free or slave state, okay? Free or slave state. Now, we've got this land. Are we going to make it all free, all slave? Are we going to divide it up? Okay, that's the debate that's happening in this nation. So that's why this land is causing friction. One more time. We have the Mexican-American War. Out of that, there's this treaty, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We get the land, Mexican secession. You can circle it easily on a map by just doing right there. And then this is going to lead to compromise. The Compromise of 1850. Okay, that's what we're going to do to decide how much of this land is free, how much is slave. That's how we get to the Compromise of 1850. Does that make sense? How do you feel about that? Okay, so now let's take a look at the Compromise of 1850. There's that land again, the Mexican secession. How are we going to divide it up? Remember, what's the debate? Free or slave state? Here's what they're going to decide. California is going to be a free state. There's California. Everybody wanted California. Why? Because it's full of gold, or at least the gold rush is happening. So we decide California free state. These are the facts I want you to know. Hopefully you've written this in your notes. If you haven't, you get another chance at it. If you're really struggling, just know that we got some land and there's a fight between whether it should be free or slave, okay? Here's some other facts. Utah territory, okay? Utah has never really been on the map until this point. Utah is now a territory, okay? New Mexico is a territory. How will they decide whether are they going to be free? Are they going to be slave? How will we know? Popular sovereignty. And what does popular sovereignty mean? If you were in class, I'm sure you know this. It means to vote. The popular vote is the sovereign. Okay, it just means to vote. Okay. All right. Do we feel good about this? Understanding the Compromise of 1850. We got some new land. This big piece of land right here. What's that whole thing called? The Mexican secession. What are we going to do with it? Or is it going to be free or slave? That leads to the Compromise of 1850. You can already see the United States is in two colors. Look, there's the South and the North, and they're using two colors. Spoiler alert, we're going to have a civil war soon. All right. Also part of the Compromise of 1850 was something called the Fugitive Slave Law. What does that mean? Let's look into it. The Fugitive Slave Act. First off, it gets rid of a lot of due process. If you just say that person's a slave, then boom, there's no judge, no jury, no trial. But there's another part. It requires Northerners to assist authorities. Northerners don't like that. Okay, they're going to rebel against this law. So you have a lot of people in the North. They don't like slavery, but they're not really doing anything about it per se. This law says you have to get off the bench and you got to play in the game. You're going to help us capture runaway slaves. And the Northerners say, no, we're not. If I'm coming off the bench, I'm playing for Team Abolitionist. Does that make sense? So the Fugitive Slave Act motivates people in the North. They thought slavery was going away, or they thought slavery was something far away. But slavery is expanding. Slavery is now in your world. And what are you going to do about it? Well, the Northerners are going to resist. Okay, let's talk about it again. Civil War on the horizon. We've gone over a lot of facts. I hope you have them in your notes. First off, if you make flashcards, it'll help you memorize a lot of this stuff. But let's say you're still just struggling and you're just like, I don't get it. Okay. You're going to have the North, most of these states up here, versus the South, most of these states down here. Okay, I'm not going to get into every state. I know that there's border states. Okay, for now, we're keeping it simple. North versus South. The North wants to get rid of slavery. The South wants to keep slavery. And they're going to fight about it. If you've got that at least, I feel good. And then we'll try to fill in the gaps as we go along. Okay, so let's talk about what the Civil War is about. Yes, it's about slavery, but there's a little bit more to the story. Before the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. A Confederate government, basically by definition, the states have all the power. I have these arrows here signifying that the state tells the national government what to do. The states had the power in the Articles of Confederation. That's part of the reason that the government collapsed. The national government didn't have enough power to survive. So they take the Articles of Confederation, they wad it up, they throw it away, and they come up with something new. That's called, boom, the Constitution. Now in the Constitution, there's a federal system where the state has power and the national government has power, and sometimes they share power, sometimes they fight about power, but the arrows go both directions. By the way, if I'm getting too deep into this, you're like, why do I need to know? Utah is one of these states. We still fight with the federal government. Who should control Bears Ears, the state or the federal government? How about Recapture Canyon? Who should control that, the state or the federal government? Who should have the ability to stop the oil, or who should have the rights to the oil and stuff like that? Anyhow, back to class. So the national government and the state government. Who is going to have the final say? That hadn't at this time really been articulated in the Constitution. The South says the states have the final say. The South says the states have the most power. So yeah, we share power, but it's 55-45 with the states having the most power. That's what the South says. And if that's true, then that means the South can keep slavery because that's what they want and they have the ultimate say. It also means if they don't like the Union, they can leave because the state is the ultimate sovereign. The state can say, I am dissolving this Union, I'm leaving. That's what it says. The North says, no, the national government has more power. Okay, the national government has 55 and the state has 45. Please, these percentages are made up to articulate a point. They're not actual percentages, but just so you see, the state has some power, the federal government has some power, but they're saying the federal government has the final say. Well, if that's true, that means the national government can regulate slavery or abolish it altogether. It also means the states are not free to leave. Okay? So, the Civil War is about this dance of the arrows, okay? Who's in charge? The federal government or the states? And then we see the arrows dancing around because that is what the Civil War is about. Who's in charge? The national government or the state government? And now we'd had this issue before with the nullification crisis where there was a debate on who was in charge. But that didn't become war because people didn't care about the tariffs that much. This is going to become a war, and this is going to become a big deal because people really, really want to keep slavery, or they really, really want to abolish slavery, and now the water is going to boil. So the Civil War is about states' rights, but it's also what's the right that the states are fighting about. They're fighting about that right to keep slavery. So yeah, the Civil War is about slavery too. Hopefully I didn't confuse you. Hopefully I helped you understand. It's both about states' rights and federal government rights, and it's also about slavery. Okay, here we go. This is just to articulate my point a little bit. We're not getting into this yet, but you see the North, those are the Union states. You see the Confederate States of America or the South, those are going to be the red states, but there's some border states. Those are going to be slave states that stayed in the Union. This is part of my argument why you can't just say the Civil War is about slavery, because there's slave states on both sides. I have other evidence, but for now, we're just going to leave it at that. Okay, little review. We had something called the Raid on Harper's Ferry. John Brown, he's an abolitionist, but he's also willing to do something about it. He's going to raid the Army Depot at Harper's Ferry. His vision is he's going to pass out the weapons to the African Americans, and then he's going to take his militia down south, and they're just going to free the slaves right then and there. They're just going to arm the slaves and have a rebellion. That's the Raid on Harper's Ferry. This is the image of John Brown. Whether you think of him, I'll let you decide how you think of him. But the South thinks of him as their worst nightmare in many ways. Okay? They're going to be very scared about this situation. So how do the Northerners feel? This is the cartoon that illustrates how the North feels. They feel like slavery is being shoved down their throats. They don't want it. Their politicians who are on each side of this guy, they're making compromises that they don't want. The Northerners feel like slavery is being shoved down their throat. So here's some things leading up to the Civil War. The Northerners look at the Fugitive Slave Act and say, I don't want any part of it. They read a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It touches their heart. They say, this is wrong. We've got to stop it. They go and they hear about Bleeding Kansas. And they go, Bleeding Kansas was when people pro-slavery people from the South and abolitionists from the North, they go into Kansas and they're going to vote whether Kansas will be free or slave. And so people are killed on both sides. And it's just some early violence before the Civil War. So the Northerners are fed up. In the South, you're taking a look at Lincoln's election, and you're noticing most people, about 60% of the population, they don't vote for Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so most people are not happy by him being elected. Specifically, people in the South. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. The Republican platform was to end slavery or to at least keep slavery from expanding west. The South feels that the election of Abraham Lincoln shows they no longer have a voice in the government and that they're basically, that they have no voice in the government. That's the best thing I can say. Okay, so from the Southern perspective, you have Harper's Ferry, where John Brown was trying to arm the African Americans. You have Bleeding Kansas, where those Northerners were coming in and fighting, and it was some early bloodshed before the Civil War. Now you have the election of Abraham Lincoln, and the South is going to secede. They're going to leave the Union. All right? That's where we're at, coming up to the Civil War. Did this review help you? I hope it did. Okay? The first shots of the Civil War are Fort Sumter. It's not going to be the first battle. The first battle is when we're going to talk about actual brigades and actual military taking the field. But the first shots of the Civil War, what is it? 1, 2, 3, Fort Sumter. Okay, good job. Now attached to this review will be a quick video about the beginning of the Civil War. Please watch that as well, and we'll be back next time for Chapter 15. Have a great day.